activity with competitiveness between change makers. The webinar will discuss how to gain critical change-making skills, such as cognitive empathy and sophisticated teamwork, and explain the change-making process, identifying patterns, spot needs. Drayton will also delve into why these skills need to be learned at a young age and debate the possibility of retraining older generation, at least to provide the support. Bill Drayton is a social entrepreneur with a long record of founding organizations and public service. As the founder and CEO of Ashoka Innovators for the Public, Bill Drayton has pioneered the field of social entrepreneurship, growing a global association of over 3,900 leading social entrepreneurs who work together to create an everyone is a change maker world. Ashoka Fellows bring big system change to the world's most urgent social needs. Over half have changed national policies within the 5 years of launch. Bill, it's really a pleasure to have you with us. And I wanted to sort of start by passing the floor to you and asking you for introductory remarks. And then I'm going to ask you questions. We invoke in a discussion. I'm going to ask you questions and we get your view about certain things. And then we'll pass it to the floor for a Q&A. Okay. So
great. Thank you
please,
very much.
Your introductory remarks.
Thanks. Thank you. And thank everyone for being here. I thought a little bit of historical framing would help. About 50,000 years or so ago, humans crossed the mouth of the Red Sea. And at that point, the largest human organization was 100 to 150 people. And now we have 2 countries, over 1 billion, we have the web. We're coming together. We're learning how very fast to be, in effect, we're becoming one organism, a brain-like organism, where each piece is connected to all the others. It's not new. When I thought it was 50,000 years of history, maybe 1 million, where this exponential rate of change was going on. But I was talking with the guy who runs AI at Google, and he said, no, it goes back to the time the first cell ate a different cell and they got along together. And the whole history of evolution is escalating cooperation. And so we're all living at a moment where that exponential increase in the rate of change and the degree and extent of interconnection, those 2 forces each reinforcing the other, has reached the point where everyone has to be a change maker to be able to play. It's a fundamental change. So that's why we're here together, and we'll explore that more fully. But let me give you an example of an Ashoka Fellow, so we're not dealing only in history and theory. And this is a Syrian fellow, Hadi Al-Khatib. Some of you may know him. He fled and landed up in Germany. And he's created something that uses millions of pieces on the web, people with their cell phones taking pictures, and pieces them together to document human rights violations, war crimes, and does it in a way that is verifiable. So it stands up in court and has done successfully and is quick and reliable. And he's gone in and negotiated with YouTube and got 630,000 things that had been removed for violence brought back as part of the record. And he originally did this for Syria. So there's the Syria archive. Then he did it for Yemen, Sudan. And those three archives are the model worldwide. They have 10 million images in them. And now they're able to go to Hong Kong or Myanmar and come in on an emergency basis. And they're training people all over the world in how to use this. So this is a synaptic architecture of the world coming together. And this empowers everyone. So this is one example of a person who has given himself permission to go and change the world. That's what social entrepreneurs do. And he's not some isolated elite. He is a person who had to flee and then gave himself permission to figure it out. And he persisted, and then he built alliances, and he got the courts to change. So that is what a social entrepreneur is. And we've got a lot of questions, and I'm sure you do. The world is changing really fast. We're changing really fast. And so let's dig in. Holly, back to you.
Thank you, sir. That's the classical question. I mean, the focus is the change-making process. I mean, in entrepreneurship, they always ask the question: are you born an entrepreneur, or can you learn some of the attributes of being an entrepreneur? I'll ask you the same question about change-making. I mean, you say that the elements of change-making are cognitive empathy. This is one. The other one is sophisticated teamwork, and then there is the change-making process, which is identifying the pattern and spotting the need. Now, my question to you is, how do you learn this?
Well, anyone can learn, but we have to help people do so. Let's just take the first one of those. It's got three parts. Conscious, that's the cerebral cortex. Empathy, mirror neurons. Based living for the good of all. Those are three elements. Each is necessary. And people have to learn how to put those three together and practice it. It used to be that you could be a good person and succeed in life just by diligently following the rules. That is no longer an option because the rules aren't there. The rate of change is accelerating faster and faster. And for the first time in this generation, anyone who has not mastered that foundational skill is going to hurt people, will disrupt groups, not because they intend it. They just don't have this fundamental ability to consciously understand what is now actually a very complex combination of teams, contexts of teams, all of which are changing, and each piece is bumping the others. And you have to consciously understand it and then apply that conscious understanding to serve the good of all, which is what humans want to do. And that's what brings health and happiness and longevity. The prophets told us that. The scientists tell us that. Our grandmother told us that, and they're all right. The problem we have right now is that a big part of humanity does not have these abilities, the abilities to be a change maker. And, you know, if you hurt me, I don't care if you're the greatest astrophysicist in the world. I don't want you around. And anyone who looks like you, I'm going to be suspicious of. That is what is dividing the world at the moment. It's the new inequality between the people who are in the new game And probably that's everyone here. And we're having a very good time. We're helping one another get better and better at this. That's what you do in a team. You have to. And the problem is there's another 40% who do not have these abilities. They could learn it at any age, but we have to help them. And we know how to do that, but we have to do it. And that's a commitment I think all of us here have to make.
Super. You sort of stress the young generations, the young age. I can see your point of view. I mean, it's a mindset, and it's always easier to change your mindset the younger you are. But do you think that the older generation are hopeless, or you can retrain them?
Everyone has mirror neurons. Everyone has a cerebral cortex, and we all want to have the power to give. What human being doesn't want that? That's the key to a good life.
Absolutely.
And people will really work at it. So it's doubly a crime to have young people not be given these abilities. Then they're going to have a bad life, and their family will be a mess, and their society. But it's a crime in any case. So let me just give you a concrete example. When I was transiting between undergraduate and going to England to study economics, I worked at the beginning of the war on poverty in the US. Growing up in Manhattan, I knew nothing about rural America, so I went off to a rural part of West Virginia. Bean Ridge, a bunch of the Bean family living on this ridge. People were very nice. They were very poor, isolated. This woman made some strawberry ice cream for me. I remember it vividly. Well, I was back there and 4 years ago, and it was really sad. Almost everyone was ill because of smoking, drugs, opioids, alcohol, bad food, obesity, but most of all, despair. They do not have a future because they don't have these abilities, and they know it. They can't move from Bean Ridge to Chicago or Los Angeles because they don't have the ability to play in the game, and they know their kids don't have a future. That's the story of all the people around them. Now, the most appalling thing about this were the dead eyes. Now, when you see someone with dead eyes, it is chilling. We have really destroyed those people. Now, what do? Well, they commit slow suicide. That's all the health data. And the non-change-making parts of America have lost 4 years of life expectancy in one generation. I've just been describing why. Now, how do you think that's one response? The other response is to blame someone else. And these folks have a need to blame other people. And that's what the demagogues come up to serve. And they choose targets. In our case, immigrants, Muslims, African Americans. Different parts of the world, it's different targets. But it's us versus them. We can't solve the other problems if societies are so deeply divided. They can't work together. How do we deal with climate? We can't deal with this stupid virus because we can't get people to cooperate on vaccination. So everyone can do it. We know how to help them do it. And it's essential that we do. So if I could just give you an example, we have something called Your Kids. And it's a very simple mechanism that any adult, any group of adults we can go to and say, world of change, world of interconnection. That's a fact. Your kids are going to have to play in that world. If you think it's changing fast now, imagine what it's like when your kids are 35. Then we introduce them to a young person who totally has her power. They feel what this is. And we ask, is your daughter practicing change making like Garvita? Does your daughter have Garvita's power? Does Egypt or any country have a future if all our kids don't have this? And then we go into the how-to. So I'll just give you a quick example. Let's imagine your 6-year-old hits her 4-year-old brother. You have a parenting opportunity to help your daughter get cognitive, conscious, empathy-based living for the good of all. Put your arm around her. You must have been pretty upset when you did that. Now, you are asking her to think consciously about what was going on. That is conscious, empathy-based living for the good of all. Practice 1. Then you ask, well, how do you think your brother felt when you did that? Practice 2. Why do you think he responded the way he did? Practice 3. What do you think we should do now? Practice 4. And later in the day, she does something really nice. She gives a little present to the postman. Put her arm around her, same 4 questions. Now, anyone can do that. And 2 things are happening. Your daughter is mastering the first of these 4 abilities. And second, you, the adult, are changing. You're helping your daughter master this. You're understanding it. And later, when you see your daughter with power, you already have that power because you helped her get it. And by the way, when you see your daughter with power, you're going to ask, well, if she has it, why not me? And why not the other kids? And why not my friends? And why not the people in my community of faith or my workplace? There's another reason for focusing on kids. Once society understands that it is critical, this is the new definition of success in growing up. Do young people know they're a change maker? And they can't know if they haven't done it. Well, once society understands that that is the new standard, that's what you have to do to have a good life, they're going to know, everyone's going to know it's true for them. And what do people care about? Well, in the US, 80% of the workforce is not emotionally connected to work. It's 85% in Europe. They do care about their kids and their grandkids and their nieces. And so people pay attention to this. We redefine success, what success in growing up is. Everyone knows. So 150 years ago, we said everyone needs to be literate because the rate of change then required it. And then the adults needed it as well. And they knew that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about some of the concepts that you helped introduce. I mean, after founding the field of social entrepreneurship, you launched Ashoka, and you introduced first, everyone can be a change maker. Then this was sort of, it evolved into everyone a change maker, which is, I think it's a step in quote unquote democracy. democratizing the concept. Now, the interesting thing when you look at your website, for example, or your previous either brochures, literatures, presentations, initially the focus was on the individual. The most powerful force for change is a new idea in the hands of the right person, which is the underpinning concept behind is an Ashoka Fellow, of an Ashoka Fellow. Now, my question first for this is this an elitist concept? Now, later on, you observe there is an interesting shift. Now, the question, and I'm quoting this out of your website, does the days when a small number of elites could affect change are long gone? We're not talking about change in the hands of few, maybe if I dare to say, Ashoka Fellows. It has to be a team, it has to be a community, it has to be a much more larger group. Well, this is, for me, again, is another step to democratizing the concept of a change maker. Now, I want to just get your views about this.
Well, let me respond at two levels. One about fellows, because no fellow is alone. They have to build a team and a movement. They can't change the world if they aren't dealing with other folks. So think about our friend Hadi. He's not sitting alone under a mushroom. He has to work with all sorts of people, and he worked very hard to build the networks with other citizen groups, with the judicial systems in multiple countries, and with the human rights movement, with the citizen sector more broadly. These are the people that are being empowered by this new tool he's developed, new arsenal of tools to use the previously isolated bits and pieces on the web. How do you bring them together? Well, that requires a lot of cooperation. And then he's now focused on building the movement, further developing the tools. The tools empower everyone, but he does trainings when he goes to Hong Kong or Myanmar. This is a huge training as well as action step. So what you're seeing is he's not alone. It wouldn't work. And you see a small organization, but for social entrepreneurs, and this is the difference with business, there's a big movement. We're not trying to capture a market. Our job is to change the world. And you do that by building movements. And so it's a different structure. And furthermore, a social entrepreneur, so entrepreneur means changing the system, or actually more important, the mindset, the framework of thinking. Social means committed from deep within to the good of all. That brings us back to that first of the four abilities. Conscious, empathy-based living for the good of all. Well, if you are in this for the good of all, and that's in everyone in Changemaker world, everyone is and has the ability to do that. That means we're living in a much more ethical, equal world, because that's what people are trying to do, need to do. And we have created a society where the solutions outrun the problems. B, we are each trying to help one another be the strongest possible player, because you have to on a team. And because that's what we want to do. conscious, empathy-based living for the good of all. Well, the biggest gift is giving people the gift of being able to give. And then finally, that's the last point, we are creating a world where everyone has the power to give, have the right of the power to give. And we don't have the people on Bean Ridge being crushed. They are with us. They are sharing in a world where everyone is helping everyone else be the strongest possible player. And we're all trying to see and solve whatever problems are there at whatever level. That is what a brain-like organism is. It's a very different society than where we've been.
Lovely. I'm going to continue on this line. One of the interesting concepts that you guys have is collaborative entrepreneurship jiu-jitsu. And my understanding, it's a network of fellows plus thousands of proven how-to models. You've talked about it briefly, but I wanted to know more. How do fellows cooperate? How do you maintain those models? How do you update it? How do you share it? Now, I want you to keep in the back of your mind, when you talk about sustainable development or development in general, this is really a horizontal effort. It's not a vertical effort. If you want to go to an area and you want to create well-being for human beings, you cannot just focus on education. You cannot just focus on clean water. You really have to focus on all aspects of livelihood of a human being, which makes it harder because you really have to have more cooperation. And with the more cooperation also, you might talk about governance. How do we play? What are the rules of the game? I just wanted to sort of hear your views about that.
Well, it's a really, really good question. We're learning very fast. That's when in an everything changing world, that's what you do all the time. And we've actually retired the phrase collaborative entrepreneurship, jiu-jitsu, and substituted purpose teams. So our work begins, and I think this is going to be universal, with an open source search for the best ideas for the good in the hands of the strongest entrepreneurs, deeply committed to the good of all. And anywhere, any subject, complete open source. And to the degree we succeed at that, it's a very delicate instrument that you begin to see people all over the world coming up with new ideas, new needs. So Hadi is part of a cluster of fellows that has come up in the last 5 years. It deals with how do we make tech good, not just tech for good, but how do we make tech itself good? He is building a major contribution to that. Well, I could give you 100 other examples. So there's a Spanish fellow, and she has developed an AI system that will audit AI systems for bias and other problems. And that is now used by some of the multinational banks. They're beginning to require it of their grantees. It's by some cities, such as Barcelona, by companies. Now, these are two seemingly different, but they're part of that open source finding. Here's a whole new subfield. And when you think about it, this is about society's decision-making architecture, your last point. Now, both of them are building new synaptic structures that connect people at all levels, up, down, sideways, all across the world. This is empowering people. So once we have that open source, we now, okay, there's a need to do this. What's the pattern? When you look across all the fellows working on a common need, well, they all have, I've just given you 2 solutions. When you look across those hundreds of solutions, you see patterns. And so far, those patterns fit what an everything changing and connected world needs. Then our job is, how do we translate that into a decision-making architecture? And us knowing it isn't much good, you have to have the world go through a change process. And this is where the jujitsu process that you were referring to comes in. And we've learned over the last 6 or 7 years how to help some of the largest forces in society recognize new strategic reality, everything changing and connected. Oops, our existing strategy isn't going to work. And we've got to move, and we have the opportunity to help lead the move, to help society in our field make this transition. That's the best strategy for the teachers' union, for an ed school. You were talking about how do we help this change in education and growing up. Well, if you are a teacher's university and you're not on this, you're in big trouble. If you're one of the first on it, and you send a letter to all the teachers who are your alumni and say, here's this new reality, and your alma mater is ready to help you. And if you're an education publisher and you don't have materials to help schools do this, that's a very dangerous position to be in. If you're one of the first to do it, that is really smart. And then you can help the ed school, and the ed school can help you, and the teachers union, et cetera, et cetera. So we've learned how to help these large forces see the new strategic reality and work with the fellows and the Ashoka Young Changemakers and one another. And this is really exciting. So it's a system, starts open source. We don't decide sitting under a toadstool ourselves what the next issues are. The best entrepreneurs come up anywhere in the world. And our skill is being able to see them and then see the need. What's the purpose society has here? What's the patterns? And how do we actually get society to make the change? Which is, of course, what entrepreneurs are good at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting when you look at the history of social enterprises in general. One of the interesting areas where it started is actually in Scotland and Northern England. And it actually started with more, it's not like a typical North American entrepreneur. It's actually more of a community association kind of a mindset, which for me is very interesting. It's the hard road. And that takes us to my next point. I'm from School of Business. And in School of Business, we teach kids leadership and top-bottom control more than bottom-up control. The bottom-up control is more of a political science, is more of a humanities, social sciences. But when you get more into development, you really understand that you really have to have the right balance between the bottom-up versus the top-bottom. You cannot exist or you cannot function properly if you're not balanced in this. So this is what I want. Now the other thing is, it is extremely hard to find community-driven and owned initiatives. And I think it's for reasons that you've talked about. Part of the change in the old time, if you live in a building or in a street or in a village, you probably know everyone. So it was natural to get more of a community-owned, driven initiative because you know everyone. The social ties was much stronger. Nowadays, it's not as strong. I mean, you really have to go to a place like India or Sub-Saharan Africa, and you start seeing things around really grassroots innovation, around how people collaborate to come with an innovation. It's not like the innovator or the leader or the entrepreneur. It's more of a community based. I just want to get your views about this.
So what a rich set of points. So just as you said, it's not vertical, it's not horizontal, it's omnidirectional connection. That's how the brain works. Every neuron is connected to every other neuron. And when you say the word helicopter, 20% of your neurons light up. You're ready to, if you know how to run a helicopter, parts of it you've practiced, they're ready to take over your inner ear, your left toe. And so you can focus on that thing coming at you. The brain, everything is connected, but it's able to be purposive at any one moment. That's what we're building for society. If you look at Hadi's work, if I just keep using this example, you can go to his website and all those 10 million images, verified images, are available to you. You can go and check. This horrible thing happened in your neighborhood. What's available in the archive? Anyone. This is available to the human rights groups. It's available to governments if they want to use it. It's available to you and me. You think about when I was just saying that social entrepreneurs don't try to capture a market. They build movements precisely so that local people can take the idea up and say, oh, Holly's idea, that's pretty good. We need that here. We're going to make that happen. Well, what's happening at that moment is the person who's said that to themselves is becoming a local change maker. And how are they going to succeed? They're going to get their friends together. They're going to form a team. And then they may get some other teams. If it works in our school, let's make it work in other schools. If it works in our branch of the business, well, let's make it work in the other branches. That I've just been describing to you how in everyone, a change maker world works. It's like the brain. And it's magical. Anyone here, any one of us can imagine, can see a problem, can imagine a solution. And if we're persistent, and if we're a really good change maker, we can build a team of teams. And all of a sudden, this new architecture allows it to spread across the world. Hadi didn't inherit power. He saw something really awful, and he decided to do something about it. He gave himself permission. Everyone here can do that. And he persisted, and he built a movement. And the movement and he are steadily, constantly improving and strengthening his original idea. This is not vertical, it's not horizontal, it's omnidirectional. Everyone powerful, everyone with the skill of being able to work together. And that goes to some of the second and third and fourth levels of abilities.
Lovely. some of the concepts I think you've alluded to, but it's not really widespread. I can give you some examples. Human rights commitments, for example. I mean, there are very few people who would view poverty as a human rights violation. I mean, I'm quoting Amartya Sen. I mean, Amartya Sen, the famous Indian economist, the Nobel laureate, he mentioned that he was talking about that the major human rights violation is poverty. We rarely think about this. Jeffrey Sachs, when he talks about SDG now, he wants to post it as human rights. Each one of them is a human right. Now, that's one thing. The other thing is the concept of giving or philanthropy. We always, when you think about philanthropy, we tend to think about someone with deep pockets and he's going to give money. We rarely think about the guys from South Africa. They have a very interesting concept. They call it the poor philanthropist. People like myself or others, yes, I mean, I cannot cough up $1 million, but I can cough up $100. But there is many more of us that on average, on aggregate, we are much more than the deep philanthropy. So it's the ability to give. The other one, which is very interesting, is dispelling the us versus them, the polarization aspect. It's very easy for us. Oh, you look different. We're not going to play with you. We're not going to talk to you. We're not going to even include you. I'm talking about certain attributes that they should really become mainstream, and they are not. And they would require a change in the mindset. And I see them that you've talked about many of them. And I can see your point at an early age, at a young age, it's much easier to learn, to teach them all of this. A child does not see color or ethnicity or religion or anything. He just sees another child he wants to play with. So I just wanted to get your view. I mean, how do we change this? How do we change the culture, not just the mindset of few people?
So let's go to the poverty point. I described Bean Ridge, this totally destroyed area in West Virginia. Giving those folks some money wouldn't make any difference. The problem is they don't have the ability to give. They don't have the ability to be a part of the everyone, a Changemaker world. For them to be able to give, and I think that's the ultimate right, the right of being able to give, of having the power to do that. If we help the people on Bean Ridge have the ability to be contributive in a world of change and interconnection, well, first of all, if they want to, they can go to Chicago and they'll be wanted. Every organization I know is desperate to find people with good change-making abilities. There's no shortage of jobs for people with change-making abilities. Quite to the contrary. Second, they don't have to go anywhere. They can start creating solutions there. Bean Ridge can become a magnet, not a place people flee if they can. That's a very different world. And there are so many so-called solutions that are based in the mindset of the world of repetition. We're going to solve the problem of youth unemployment in Africa by giving young people skills. Now, what is the half-life of any skill? But one thing for sure is it's getting shorter and shorter, faster and faster. You know that. We all know that. But yet, we think we're going to solve the problem of youth unemployment by giving people jobs. What? I mean, skills. And then in the old world, that was great. You got a skill and you repeat it for life in a world which was designed for efficiency and repetition, assembly line, law firms, etc. That world is gone. the people in Bean Ridge are left stranded. Let me give you another statistic. In the US in 2000, the economic output per capita in change-making versus non-change-making or low change-making counties was roughly equal. It was just 5% more in the change-making areas. 20 years later, 2020, it's 71 to 29. Because one part of society is taking off exponentially, and the other is in a death dive that's exponential, final death dive. And if you think that difference is there now, just imagine what it's going to be like when your daughter is 35. If she doesn't have the ability to contribute, she is going to be poor, crushed, and unhappy. And she's going to hurt people, not because she wants to, but because she doesn't have the ability not to. This is really urgent. And the old frameworks, it's not money, it's whether or not we help people do what they want to do, be able to give, to help others. That's what people want to do. And we're in this magical transition. Most of humanity is already in the new game. We've got to help the other 40%. Otherwise, we're all going to suffer terribly.
Lovely. My last question, and then I'm going to open the floor for, we could go forever, but I'm going to leave some space for Q&A. My last comment for you, and I just want to get your views on this. One of the speakers we invited is Colin Mayer, University of Oxford, and he talks about the purpose of businesses. His definition of a purpose of business that companies should solve problems of society or environment, do no harm, make a profit. And he was saying that eventually, in the near future, every company will be a company with this type of a purpose. Now, my question for you, do you think we're going to see this in entrepreneurs in general, that all entrepreneurs will have to be social entrepreneurs eventually? Or is this too much to ask?
Well, every form of organization has to change. If any organization doesn't make sure that all its people are change makers, point one, and if it's not organized as a fluid, open, integrated team of teams of teams, it's out. So that's fundamental. It doesn't matter whether it's a community of faith or a business or a citizen group or a government agency. So we're all heading towards a common form of organization. And let me just use an example. Santillana is the world's largest Spanish and Portuguese education publisher. And we've worked with them. They've understood that if they keep publishing only materials appropriate for the world of memorization and repetition, a competitor is going to suddenly appear sometime serving the new need, the new definition of success, and they could lose their market. So we have worked with them, and they have developed a very different set of materials for 6 to 12-year-olds and for high school students. And the teacher's manual went from this to this. And in September, they started selling the high school materials. And in the first month, they sold 50,000 units covering 3 years of high school in Brazil, and it will now accelerate from there. They are positioning themselves to be the dominant publisher in Portuguese of education materials, and they're now spreading it to the Spanish-speaking world, Mexico, Peru, Argentina, Spain. This is really smart. It's also serving the needs of society. They are helping society make this transition. Any company that is not making this transition is toast. You know what proportion of the Fortune 500 companies of 30 years ago still exist? 10, 15%. There's a really big danger if you don't understand change in the strategic environment. It's an everything changing, everything connected world, and we're at the turning point now. Let me give you some evidence of that. We invented the word changemaker, taking the verb to change and to make, two very strong verbs, and put them together in the spring of 1981. I remember I was sitting at Nariman Point in what was then called Bombay. It made it into the dictionary about 8 years ago, and now it's everywhere. Why is it everywhere? Because people need it. The awareness tipping process is underway. Most of us are already in the new game. And any company, any community of faith, any one of us who doesn't make the transition now is going to be in big trouble. That's the negative side. If your daughter doesn't do this, she's in big trouble. But if she has these abilities, it's magical. So let me give you one other story. We have a program for young people to experience your dream, your team, your changed world. So we had a meeting of about 350 of these young people. I went over for lunch, and a 6-person table. And this very small young woman came down and sat to my right. She introduced herself and very quickly said, "I'm 12," because I think she's so small and she's sick of people thinking she's 8. So I then asked her the obvious question in that context, well, what's your venture? Now here's what she said, and this is almost exactly her words. My brother is autistic, and all through school, I would cry. She made that gesture when he was not treated properly. Now we fixed that. Oh, how did you do that? Well, we get together whenever we see a special student not being treated well, and we figure out what to do. And then we go and do it, and we're very persistent. Now, that's 90% word for word what she said. If you had been there, you wouldn't have one cell in your body doubting. She is a change maker, and she knows it. She knows the world is always going to need her. She has her PhD at 12. She can give herself permission to see a problem. She knows she can build a team. She's not a solo actor. And she can change her school. That's her world. Now, we want that for everybody. And we want that to be the norm in every school. The norm. So that it's not a really hard thing for a lonely kid to do. So I asked her, how many student groups are there in Shirley School, middle school? That's where she is. Now, this is in a very poor rural area. There's nothing elite about this. Over 50. Now, how many middle schools do you know have over 50 student groups? Oh, so what happened is that in this area, one person understood everyone a change maker idea and understood that if a young person, this is what he said, his name is Phil Growinski. Oh, if a young person is a change maker, they don't have to leave. this is an area where people flee when they finish school because there are no jobs. And then a few minutes later, he said, if we have a whole bunch of kids who are change makers, we become a magnet. We reverse the whole thing. And so he went and did that for 16 townships. That's why there are 50 student groups in that middle school. In 16 townships, you have somewhere between 40 and 80 student groups per school. Now, we know how to do this. We can do this. And everyone should have the ability, every single child and young person has to have the ability to be able to be a giver in life. This is the right of being able to be a giver.
Okay. I have two questions. I'm going to start with Noha El-Mikawi. She's Ford Foundation representative in Egypt. Dr. Noha, would you mind asking your question, please?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ali. I find this to be quite an inspiring conversation. Bill, thank you so very much for sharing your thoughts with us. I'm gonna ask you for something that might sound to you as if it's a spoiler kind of question, but in fact it's not. That's not my intention, to spoil the spirit of enthusiasm and empowerment that you are instilling in your audience today and all the time, in fact. But it's actually because what I'm asking is, it bothers me. And it goes as follows. You used our brains as a networked model that should inspire us. But those same brains are being replaced by algorithms and artificial intelligence that's influencing how we as individuals, as well as communities, feel, think, and believe. So, Bill, what makes you sure building social movements, which often is a very slow process, what makes you think that building social movements will be able to stand up to this very rapid change maker called, in my words, the invisible hand of algorithms and the concentrated power in the tech industry? What makes you think that social movement building, which is a meticulous process, can stand up to a very rapid other change maker that we cannot control? Over to you.
Well, it's a really good question because democratic decision making is slower, but it's a lot surer. And I think part of the change that's going on is that we're learning how to move faster. So I described the jujitsu process and what we call the purpose process. Well, we're just learning this and it's working. And it's allowing us to move much faster than we did before. Open sourcing, individuals come up with ideas faster. And we now have this methodology. Once we see a cluster, good tech, right on your point. Okay, there's a need. What are the purposes that we have to serve here? And then when you look across the work of the fellows, what are the patterns? And then from there, the decision-making architecture and this completely new process we didn't have before. We demonstrated it in Brazil, which is why I was using the example of Santillana, which is the leading Brazilian education publisher. But that's now being replicated by Lantern Books, which is the leading education publisher in English in West Africa, for example. Well, to the degree we are able, which we are, to help these large institutions, companies and non-companies, see their strategic interest and find the right 5 of their next generation leaders to seize hold of this and run with it. That's very key to the methodology. Then all of a sudden, this is Santayana's interest as much as ours. It's their core strategy. And the same thing is true for the syndicate of the people who run the 5,800 school districts and for multiple ed schools. The city of Manaus, which is also what we call a jujitsu partner. Well, you can see how they multiply one another and then they connect globally. The fact that this is key for Santayana makes it more obvious for Lantern Books. Well, that's new. This whole methodology, if you think about it, from open source through needs, patterns, decision-making, and then onto this very dramatically accelerated process of helping society go through the decision-making process. That's speeding up on our side as well. And we have to, obviously. So one of the things that's so brilliant about this is that it took a long time to get from one cell to 2 cells living together. And a very, very long time before we had consciousness. And since then, the rate at which all this is accelerating and coming together, you know the statistics, there are more scientists and much more change makers. It's less easily measured now than there ever have been in all of human history. And we're better wired together, which means it's not just the numbers. So you think about the 2 examples I used. They both are increasing the wiring and the speed and the ability and the power of the actors. If you're running an organization and you now have an AI system that will audit your AI systems, well, that increases your ability to manage your own institution. And also, anyway, so you're exactly right, and we are in a race. We've got to make sure everyone can play, because otherwise the division makes it impossible to make decisions and move ahead. It's just yeah. So it's dangerous. We got to everyone a Changemaker in the classical area in North India and Levant/Greece, and then we lost it. And it took a long time to get it started again. We can't afford to lose it this time.
I have 2 questions, one from Vineet, one other from Adnan. I'm going to take Vineet first. If you allow us, Bill, we can go a little bit beyond we've already 5 minutes beyond the 8 o'clock mark. So we'll probably be another 5 or 10 minutes, if you don't mind.
Great.
Vineet, please unmute yourself and ask your question, please. Hello, Vineet.
Yes, yes, it was a wonderful discussion.
Hello, Vineet.
Yeah.
Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. So I think it must be clear now. It
Yes,
must
yes,
be clear
please.
now. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So my basic question is regarding this social entrepreneurship, which is a lot more becoming a top-down approach. Where the youth and the young basically are much more interested in working for the large corporates, or for that matter for the large innovation like cryptocurrencies and fintech, etc. But when it comes to working for the for example, an example in emerging countries, for example, even in sub-Saharan Africa, where we find that the local government is becoming a big barrier, or where there are local these corporate interests, local businesses, they are not able to bring that sort of changes, they are not able to bring that sort of large innovations as far as Changemaker is concerned. So how can we bring that sort of initiative where where we can have last mile connectivity as far as these education is concerned, where healthcare, and where for example other sectors, for example even in agriculture also, because that is where a lot more in case if we are able to have delivery system efficiency in that area, things can work out quite a lot. And that's where even in this current crisis of vaccine is also facing problem because of that, because the Changemaker environment is not able to work out in the poor segments of the society, because the rigidity is quite big. So thanks very much.
So you made several important points. Let me just touch on the problem of government. Government is the last large sector of society that has not made the transition structurally to competition and entrepreneurship. It is typically still structured as a repetitive activity with top-down discipline and vertical stovepipes. Ali referred to this problem earlier. And it's aggravated when you don't have democracy to add an element of intelligence and hearing capacity. So that is a real problem. And I think one of the challenges we all have is, how do we help governments make the transition? And this is a big entrepreneurial opportunity. There is no reason that, for example, an environmental agency can't organize in teams of teams around particular objectives. Each new regulation is responding to a need, a change in technology. It would be very easy to do conceptually, but working through the transition, and the most difficult part is the framework change. Getting the first examples of a team of teams architecture in government would be really, really important. So another point you were making is that poorer communities have more difficulty with this world of change. And sadly, that's true. So who is less likely to master the new abilities? It's people from disadvantaged communities. And I'll just use, African American example, so I'm very familiar with it. So those African Americans who are living in the non-middle class Black communities, where are kids supposed to get these abilities if their parents don't have them, and the schools are clueless, and the street culture is an opposite culture? How are those kids supposed to learn this? Well, the consequence is that a disproportionate proportion of lower class Blacks are behind in getting this new set of skills. That's the other side of that coin, is to the degree that one helps a disadvantaged community get these skills, they can leapfrog out of the disadvantage. You mentioned earlier, there's a bidding war for anyone who has these abilities. You know, if you're purple with pink hair and you have change-making abilities, people want you. And so again, if you want to deal with traditional prejudice and traditional poverty, this is a hugely powerful thing. If we can give those communities this ability, that's the most effective way of helping them break the old barriers. And, you know, the story of this young woman I just mentioned from Shirley Middle School, she doesn't come from a rich family or background, but she could master this. She went into a middle school at 11 and she had a problem. And all the kids said to her, "You got a problem? Think of a solution, build a team, look around. That's the way we do it. That's the norm." And she did. Now, that can happen in any village, in any disadvantaged community. We have 1,300 Ashoka Fellows focused primarily on kids. And over 90%, actually, sorry, we just got new data, it's 89% put kids in charge. And we know what the results are because they almost all do evaluations. So the first result is that math scores go up, language scores go up, bullying rates go down. Now, those are the three things that schools measure. That's what we have available, but we know that when any kid has that experience, they've had a dream, they've built a team, and they've changed their school or their religious community, they have it, they know they have it, and they'll do it again and again, and they'll get better each time. The Ashoka Fellows overwhelmingly deal with poor kids. So I'll give you one example. Mohammed Ibrahim in Bangladesh, dealing with very poor rural kids. We put kids in charge. Several things happen. These are UN statistics. The enrollment went up 40%. The dropout rate was cut in half. This is rural schools in Bangladesh. The problem is not the kids. The problem is we have to give them the opportunity to do what they want to do. Every kid wants to be able to be a contributor, to be a giver in society, and we have the responsibility of making sure that they can do that, and we know how to do that.
Okay, last question is from Adnan. Adnan, please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this amazing opportunity. I'm an Ashoka Fellow myself from Morocco, and I deal with kids. So definitely I can just second whatever was said. I have two questions that are, I would say, slightly off topic. Bill, what would be your most impactful, I would say, choice over your very inspiring career? And my second question would be, if you had a magic stick, something that just would change everything, what type of decision would you take from tomorrow? And thanks again for a very inspiring conversation.
Well, the most critical for me was when I was in elementary school. If you saw me up close, you would see why I'm not made for football. It's the American version where you crash into one another. I imagine why I was being tortured with Latin and math and French. And so I didn't really do a whole lot with them. I really loved history, geography. So I created things. And this started with a hand typed using carbon paper. If anyone has any idea what that is, I could make, if I really pounded on the typewriter hard, I could make 5 copies. So I'd have to do this 4 or 5 times to make just enough for my class. Okay, so newspaper gets started, I save up, I eventually buy a mimeograph machine and it grows. And the paper goes to 30 pages, 64 pages, and multiple schools. And well, that was my equivalent of the experience that this young woman I was describing had. And it was incredibly fun. And I learned a lot about how people work and society works. And, you know, I am so grateful because my parents put up with this. I had a principal who made room so I could be in places where I wasn't supposed to be, i.e., you know, other schools, getting ads, whatever. Not every kid has that. And I also grew up in Manhattan, where, you know, as a school kid, you have a free bus and subway pass, so you can go anywhere. It was an amazing freedom and support. And so that, in a personal sense, was a pretty major turning point. So in terms of the one big thing we've got to do now, it's really clear. We have to make sure that we are not crushing other people. We've got to make sure that we do not have any kid who does not have the ability to be a giver. We can do that. And this is the ultimate civil rights, human rights movement. We've never crushed people as badly as we are now. It used to be you could move from West Virginia and you could get a factory job. Not now. And furthermore, this new inequality gets worse every year because those of us who are in the game, we're helping one another get better and better at it. That's what we're doing right here now. And this is wonderful. We're helping one another grow and get better. But what about the 40% that are not in the game? They're falling further behind every year, every day. The gap gets bigger. The division gets bigger. The despair gets bigger. The anger gets bigger. The division gets bigger. This is our central dignity, love and respect in action requirement. And so thanks everyone again for being here. You wouldn't be here if you weren't caring about this. And let's get this change done.
Bill, I really want to thank you for really enlightening discussion. It's been really a mind opener. What I enjoyed most is really the positive energy that he exudes. I really have to give credit to Iman Babers. I really have to thank her because when I asked her, can we get Bill Drayton as a finale for our season for the fall webinars, she right away acted it. So I thank you, Iman. And this is really a great finale for a fall webinar. Please wait for, follow us. We're gonna come back again in February. We're taking holidays and the winter break off. So again, it's really, I really have to thank you. Thank you everyone for hanging up with us for almost half an hour after the 8 o'clock. Thank you all, and happy holidays for all, and happy New Year. We'll see you next year, inshallah.